That was Jan and Dean with their number 8 hit of 1964, Dead Man's Curve. Between 1959 and 1966, Jan and Dean racked up an impressive 24 hit singles on the Billboard Hot 100. Now, while they genuinely lived the California surf and hot rod lifestyle to its fullest, they were also dubbed the Clown Princes of Rock and Roll for their zany and off-kilter sense of humor, which endeared them to generations of fans. Now, in 2016, Dean Torrence has written his memoir, covering his days with his friend and partner Jan Berry in a book called Surf City, The Jan and Dean Story. Dean, welcome to the show, and I'd like to start off by asking how this whole book project came about.
Oh, actually, it really wasn't my idea. I'd just been kind of writing my memories and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it'd be nice for me to write down while I still remembered them. And that was mostly on flights. Whenever I was on a flight, especially in the 90s, I'd just take a notebook with me. I always got a window seat, so it'd be nice, snug up against a window, and
right.
I'd get out my notebook, and I would just, kind of in chronological order, just write down my memories. I guess I suppose I thought it could certainly be a book if anybody was interested. But some book agent called me, I think it was about the first of the year now, and he was a friend of a friend, and he had heard that I had been writing.
Mm-hmm.
So he asked me if if it'd be okay if he went looking for a book deal. And I said, well, sure. Why not? Since most of the hard work was already done, I figured, well, may as well. I was still looking for a really good ending, and I hadn't quite found one at the moment.
Right.
Yeah, that was just rationalization on my part. But I thought there might be some. I was working on a big development project that included a motorplex and was going to have some classic car overtones and had a lot to do with the Southern California car culture. That would have been a really, really neat ending to have it all culminate in that.
Right.
So that's still on hold.
Okay, well, that's
and
book
it's been
2.
on hold for 15 years, so I'm kind of used to it. And when this guy got me a book deal, I thought, well, I'll write the last chapter, whatever it may be, and let's do it.
Well, I'm so glad you finished it up because I read the book over 3 nights and thought it was just fantastic. And I really didn't know all that much about Jan and Dean outside of the basic story. But the tales you tell in here are hilarious, and there seems to be a running thread throughout the book, which is Jan and Dean getting up to mischief.
We enjoyed mischief, yes. And a little larceny here and there.
Yeah. When you first met Jan, he had this enormous record collection, and he was duplicitous.
Duplicitous.
Yeah, in his way of obtaining these records.
Well, true, but he was just, as a teenager, he was taking advantage of the dimwits in the music business, which wasn't hard to do, believe me.
Right.
Jan had an IQ of about 177-ish, which is way up there. And so even as a teenager, he was smart enough and clever enough to be able to outwit, most adults. And he did so. So the story you're talking about is that Jan did love music and loved rock and roll, but he figured out that obviously most radio stations would have to write a letter to a record company requesting material. That way there's a mailing list, and the record company puts this particular radio station on its list, and with every new release, they would mail out these records. I mean, most of the rest of us never even really thought about how a radio station got their records.
Right.
Obviously, they get them from the company. But Jan figured that out at about 17 years old, and he had a printing class in high school. And Mr. Fukuzawa was one of our favorite teachers, and he let us print just about anything. And Jan asked if he could print up a letterhead. And of course, sure, that's what that's what you normally get printed. So Jan designed his own letterhead. He decided that his radio station should be called K-Jan Radio, and he even had a little marketing tagline saying "The Voice of Bel Air," which he did live in Bel Air.
Right.
And so it's K-Jan Radio, The Voice of Bel Air. It was on the letterhead, and of course he typed out a letter to whom it may concern, or the promotions department, or whatever, at any sort of record label that he could find, and sent them this letter. And I'd say within weeks, he was getting maybe 100 records a day. And he also asked for not just one record. He was hip to the fact that most all radio stations had at least 4 to 5 disc jockeys, and each disc jockey in those days would have to have his own record,
right,
or his own playlist. So Jan would ask for 5 copies of each new release. So that's why there were hundreds of records, hundreds a day.
What kills me is I read that story, and I'm thinking, now why didn't I think of that? I mean, I could have loaded up with free records. Yeah.
Well, it took a 17-year-old from Bel Air, right, and he figured it out. None of the rest of us would have ever figured it out either. It was so much fun to go right from high school, from our last class, and go up to Jan's house to open up the mail. Because each one of us was a disc jockey, you see. So I got to open up my own.
You're right. You're
my own package.
Fictional DJ.
Yes, fictional DJ. Well, I mean, in our minds, in our little teenage minds, we thought of ourselves as real disc jockeys, because we would make a tape like a radio show and play the records and all that. Jan had a reel-to-reel, actually had 2 reel-to-reel machines, and we would make this tape pretending to be disc jockeys and introduce records, and then those were played at our Saturday night parties up at Jan's house. You know, he wouldn't have a record player like anybody else, or he even had to, turn on a radio. We had our own mixed tape that was played at the parties, and we would dedicate, songs to couples that we knew that were going to be there and all that kind of stuff. We were way ahead of the curve.
Yes, very industrious young men.
We were busy at mischief and mayhem.
Well, all that home tape recording went to good use. That was Jan and Dean with their 1959 number 10 hit, Baby Talk, mostly recorded in Jan's garage. Dean Torrence is our guest today. His new book is called Surf City, The Story of Jan and Dean. Now, it was only a few years after a song like Baby Talk that in your book, you and Jan are driving around town listening to the radio, and you hear a song by a group named the Beach Boys called Surfin'. And you and Jan look at each other and go, what is this? It sounds like one of our records.
Well, they had the doo-wops.
Yeah.
And we were the only kind of other doo-wop act, I think, in L.A. There weren't very many. So, they even admitted that they patterned some of their stuff, mirrored what we were doing. And actually, we took it as a compliment.
Right.
We didn't feel threatened at all. We thought, it's pretty neat, because we weren't sure if we were going the right direction. So the fact that somebody else had thought what you were doing was good enough for them to copy, again, we were pleased.
And, of course, you guys all became friends, and the story I've heard about the song Surf City was that Beach Boy Brian Wilson demoed the song for you two in the studio and offered it up to Jan and Dean.
No, well, kind of. He was very excited because we were now pals, to give us a little preview of his next single. The Beach Boys had put out Surfin' and Surfin' Safari, and Surfin' Safari was out when we met the guys. And we were all together in the studio. Jan and Dean were recording Surfin' and Surfin' Safari with their permission, and then they were kind enough to come in the studio and help do the tracks, and then helped us do all the vocals. because we all liked to be in a vocal group. And Jan and I started out in a group of guys of at least 6 or 8 people. So we were never really comfortable being a duo. We always wanted to be in a vocal group, and it wasn't our fault that the group just kept breaking down, and
Right.
there was only 2 of us left. Now we meet the Beach Boys, and we go, here's our vocal group. So they're invited to the studio, and we could just be this marvelous vocal group that we always wanted to be. They had already put out Surfin' and Surfin' Safari, so those songs had already done what they were going to do, and they had been on the charts and then had fallen off the charts. In that day, we figured a song had a shelf life of maybe 2 months, 3 months, and once it was gone, it was gone.
Right.
So they were very, very pleased, or especially Brian, since he wrote those songs, that Jan and Dean were going to re-record them with their help and put them on our next LP. That would mean that Beach Boys would get exposure being on our next LP, and Brian, as a songwriter, would also get to be a songwriter and a publisher. He would publish most of his own songs too. So it was a twofer for him, and he was thrilled that we were going to do this. You want to hear my next single? Oh, sure. And he starts playing this tune, and we're going, wait a minute, that's a Chuck Berry song.
Famed autograph.
Yeah, it's obviously a great song, but we had to explain to him that actually Chuck Berry had written it, and other people can't just come along and change the words
Right.
and own it. You know, you're going to have to get in touch with Chuck Berry and work out something, because he may not want you to change the words. I don't know. We knew Chuck, and we said, look, we could probably talk Chuck into it because we've worked with him. Give it to us. We'll get Chuck to agree to this, maybe give you writer's credit. But if you attempt to do this on your own, you're going to get sued. And Brian said, no, my dad said it was okay. We said, Brian, your dad works in a machine shop. I'm not sure he knows much about the music industry. And then he said, oh, no, my dad does. He wrote a song that Lawrence Welk played once. Oh, okay, well, we didn't know that.
Right.
But we still pressed, give us this song, and we'll make it work. He said, no, I'm going to keep it. He said, but if you want something, I had another surf song that I was working on that's similar, and I'll give that to you. It's about half written, and if you want it, you can finish writing it, and it's my gift to you. Well, it's not a gift, but
Right.
we'll have to pay him for it if we make any money, which is fine.
Right.
And we said, okay, what's this song? And he starts, 2 girls for every boy. I said, oh, that's interesting opening. Then he had a little bit of a melody and a chorus, and probably half the words, as I remember. We said, okay, that's a pretty neat song. And he had another one called When Summer Comes, Gonna Hustle You, that he wasn't sure if he was going to finish. He was writing probably a song every other day.
Mm.
So he had plenty of leftovers. So he gave us When Summer Comes, Gonna Hustle You 2 as well. And we all went out to lunch, and we took the songs home and worked on them, finished them, and cut tracks to them, and then invited him to come do the vocals. And he was more than happy to come help us with the vocals. Loved the song. He loved the tracks. And we've been making music together ever since.
Beautiful lead vocal on the song Like a Summer Rain by our guest today, Dean Torrence. Mr. Torrence, I'm going to ask you about a song that I don't think I've ever heard you comment on before.
Probably for good reason.
Yeah, well, we're going to find out, because I have to, the title is so long, I have to take my glasses off.
Anaheim,
Azusa and Cucamonga Sewing
Cucamonga.
Circle Book
Very
Review and Timing Association. It's like the arrangement for I Get Around mixed with It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Well, it could be, but actually it's mixed with how I explained it. The thing that you're trying to figure out, the odd part of that song, is a Bach chorale.
Ah.
Bach and Beach Boys. We thought it was a good fit. Jan was pre-med at UCLA, but he minored in music. And he had an arranging class, and the arranging class was supposed to learn all these Bach chorale things that were written probably in, 1800s or something like that. And very complicated, really neat vocal things. And Jan took one of those melodies and mixed it with I Get Around. And we made Anaheim, Azusa, and Cucamonga Sewing Circle Book Review and Timing Association. Why not?
I always tell people, you think you're a good musician? Try playing this.
Try playing this. Well, it's complicated, to be sure. I don't think the recording sounded as good as it should have because it got so complicated. And we were still kind of working with maybe stereo 2-track, but had we done that song maybe a year later, a year and a half later, we could have done a lot of those almost Beatlesque type recordings. It would have really, really been that much better. But for what it was, that we did a pretty good job.
I think it was after this song that you and Jan started delving more into comedy,
Well, even Anaheim Azusa is about some senior citizens in a car club.
Right.
So it's all tongue-in-cheek, but the structure of the music was always just as high-tech as you could make it.
Oh, sure. And you guys were getting into these high-concept albums like Jan and Dean Meet Batman. And again, this comedy comes through, and it's in your stage presentation. And even in the promos you cut for various radio stations. I mean, they're very Monty Python-esque. They don't really sound
like
like
a huge compliment.
Well, it's true.
Monty Python-esque. Because that's probably the direction we were going in. Even the television show, we did get our TV pilot sold. It was going to be on opposite. It's going to be debut the same season that the Monkees debuted. So both shows would have been new at the same time, but nobody really knew the Monkees. So we would have had a huge head start on them. But we really wanted to go kind of that Monty Python direction. And the pilot, maybe it had teeny little overtones of Monty Python. But when the damn thing got sold and we were actually doing these shows, we were going to exert a lot more pressure on the powers to be in television that this was the direction we were going in. It's our show. It's about us. So
right.
If you don't like it, fire us, and we'll just go back to school because we don't care.
Our guest today is Dean Torrence from Jan and Dean. Now, I know that Jan's terrible car accident put the group on hold for a number of years, and in that time, you started Kitty Hawk Graphics and began designing album covers, a very successful career designing album covers. Now, I can't remember if this was in the book or not, but did you always have an interest in art and graphic design?
I was always fascinated with, and there wasn't even a word for it at the time, but I instinctually knew that it was important, was branding. So the kind of the humor came from me, the dress came from me, the attitude kind of came from me.
Right.
And I was always the one in a recording studio, always kind of pressing for the tongue-in-cheek part. So, I like the branding part. I like figuring out how to market stuff, and I knew that merchandise was going to be important. So the packaging, of course, was going to be important. And I kind of, again, instinctually knew that an album cover should do more than just be a picture. I mean, it should tell kind of a story. It needed to project to the consumer. When the consumer's looking at it, you grasp what these people are all about and what the music is about. Up until that time, you just go to a studio, take a headshot, and lay some type on it. That always bothered me.
Right.
I never understood why you do that, especially when you were doing songs about the Southern California, either surf culture or beach culture or car culture. because those are all visual things.
Right.
Why not put them on a cover or on the back or inside? Why not have a package that opens up and has a gatefold? And then once you start printing on the front and the back and maybe inside, I also noticed, hey, you've got dust covers, the white piece of paper and envelope that holds the record. There's nothing on there. It costs you a quarter of a cent to print something else on there or do something visual on there. Again, to enhance your branding. The Beatles figured that out, too, very nicely. And they were the first ones to finally do it totally right. I would always be in these pissing matches with the art department, and they didn't have a clue what I was talking about. But thank God for the Beatles. They came along, changed pretty much the whole business. And once that happened, then we just point to them and say, that's what we've been trying to do now for 2 or 3 years. And then it became acceptable.
Right. And then it became your career.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I had fun doing it. I still have fun doing it. Every year I do the Beach Boys tour. And like this year, it was 50-year anniversary of Good Vibrations.
Right.
So I created a whole visual design to promote the 50-year anniversary of Good Vibrations, which, of course, was a VW hippie bus.
Right.
It was the first, and it's a bus, so it does have something to do with an automobile, more or less. But it was our first real kind of psychedelic era. So I still enjoy doing it.
Now, obviously, the story of Jan and Dean is both a fun story, but also a tragic one, with Jan's car accident in 1966 and how he struggled to come back. And he passed away, unfortunately, back in 2004. But you're still out there performing, aren't you?
Well, they seem to, audiences still seem to love to hear those songs, thank goodness. So I'm just as happy doing them for them. And I pretty much have I think I only have one new band member since Jan passed away. The rest of the guys were pretty much the Jan and Dean band. So unfortunately we're missing one guy, but we can still, sing the music for you, and people seem to still enjoy it. I worked with the Beach Boys just last Saturday. Matter of fact, I meant to text Mike and thank him for that, because it's always fun. They had sellout bunch, and they danced and sang every single song, and it's just I can't describe it. Who would have thought that 50 years later that it still would be kind of a movement? But the songs are so time specific to the 60s, and the 60s is a time that would never be replicated again. And so these songs all pretty much bring back all those memories of the late 50s and at least up through the mid-60s.
Where would people go? I mean, it seems like a silly thing to say because I went into Barnes & Noble and I bought your book. That's where I got it. But where would people go to get the book and find out what you're doing these days?
The book is available on Amazon. I think most of my friends got the book if I didn't give it to them yet, and those that wanted it quicker than waiting for it, getting it from me. Amazon is really easy to order it and get it like 2 days later. We have a website, jananddean.com. I keep pretty current with what we're up to. There is a Facebook page, and I think there is one for both me and for Jan and Dean. And that guy is a good friend, and he keeps it pretty current.
That's David Beard, I would imagine.
David Beard, right.
Oh, yeah, he's on this show all the time. We're always chatting.
He knows more about me than I do.
Right.
I have to ask him sometimes.
Before I let you go, my last question. There's a photo in the book of you and Jan in the studio, and you're with two really, really great-looking girls. Who are they?
Boy, I wish I knew.
I was like, wow, they're with these two knockouts. Who are they?
They're cute little surfer girls, aren't they?
Yeah.
They just showed up. I'm pretty sure that they came with the recording studio. So I'm pretty sure that somebody in the recording studio industry may have told these girls are daughters of an engineer or something. He may have said Jan and Dean are going to be in the studio, and I'll tell you when they're going to be there, and I'll leave the door open or something. And they were so cute. It's like, we weren't about to kick them out. They just showed up. And my sister took the picture because she was there with her camera. And in the next studio, Bob Dylan was in the studio next to us.
Wow.
So my sister wandered into his studio, and he kicked her out.
Wow.
So she came back to our studio. She was very, very hurt and pissed off. She wasn't distracting him or anything. She just was there, and he should have known she must have been a friend of somebody's, but he didn't care. So she came back over to our studio, and she goes, now this is where anybody can walk in, including these girls who she didn't know either. And we said, they're there. What can it hurt?
Right. Well, all the fun was obviously happening in the Jan and Dean studio, that's for sure. Thank you so much, Dean. It's been a great thrill talking to you. Have a great rest of your day.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thanks, Dave.